Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are going to be analysing the top 8 deck lists, as well as looking at the Day 1 and 2 breakdown and the top 32 breakdown of the NAIC, the largest tournament of the year, the end of the season. There is just Worlds remaining in this format, and it's the same format as the NAIC, so this is going to be a real big indicator sort of predicting the World Championships. It was actually the 2022 NAIC winning deck that ended up going on and winning the World Championships as well, with a slight variation. It was still Arc Peak, but changed a few things. So these lists are going to be cream of the crop with really high and strong records, with very good lists and pilots behind them, no doubt. And they're going to be, again, a really good indication of what's going to be powerful going into the World Championships in Yokohama, Japan. Let's start off by looking at the Day 1 deck usage breakdown, and we see the 6 most popular archetypes here. We start off with Gardevoir, tickling that sort of 24.5% range, almost 25% of the field. A quarter of the people playing in this tournament were playing Gardevoir. That's absolutely insane. Yes, Gardevoir is a very powerful archetype, but it's a decision-heavy, slow archetype as well. So I'm really surprised at how many people decided to rock up with Gardy. Yes, it's the most powerful archetype. Yes, it's fun. Yes, it's a stage 2. And yes, there's a lot of crazy things you can sculpt with this deck. But I felt like there was going to be a big target on this archetype's back, and I felt that Lost Zone box was going to take up a lot more meta share, actually. So a little bit surprising to see so much Gardevoir out there. Now, Gardy actually still had a decent tournament. There were 2 in top 4. So even though it had really high percentage Day 1, its conversion wasn't horrific going into Day 2, and it still went really deep into the tournament. So Gardevoir is still going to be one of those top contenders for Worlds, no doubt. Lost Zone box was the second most popular deck, which I think most people would have expected, but quite the drop-off. I think I was expecting around roughly 20% Gardy and maybe like 18% Lost box, so this is a real surprise to see. A bit less than expected. Again, a decision-heavy, slower archetype, which may have put some people off, but as a natural foil to Gardevoir, I expected this to be a little bit more popular. Then we have Lugia Archeops. Really didn't do all that well as we look at the sort of Day 2 and especially in the top 32 conversion. But that was the third most popular archetype. I think most people were landing on Single Strike, just has that wider coverage, doesn't immediately lose to Duraludon, which obviously had a great tournament. So it feels like that's going to be, the sort of colourless Lugia definitely falling off of popularity and everyone jumping back to the Single Strike train, I would imagine, going towards the World Championships. Mew, even with Spiritomb and the sort of question mark of how popular it was going to be, still the 4th most popular deck with 9.5%. And I imagine this is largely taken up by the fusion-based build. Then we have chien-pao as well. This was the sort of question mark of how popular it was going to be. Super, super popular archetype in online tournaments, with a decent number of conversions, and ended up being the 5th most popular deck, even though I think a number of people expected this to be not a tier 1 archetype, but possibly with their own testing and hoping to have a bit of surprise factor, having a decent time into Gardevoir and Lost Zone box with the help of Greninja Cologne plays at times. Definitely are still merits to playing this archetype, but this feels like a really high percentage for me. And although it didn't have like a terrible tournament, it had decent conversion from Day 1 to Day 2. It didn't really go that deep in the fields overall. There were only a few of them in that top 32 that I don't think chien-pao Baxcalibur is going to be as popular for the World Championships. We then have Arceus Giratina. This is a really interesting one. It was the 6th most popular Day 1, but you'll notice it drops off in Day 2 conversion, and Arctura really just takes over. Obviously, it got 2nd place as well, but it felt like everyone was going in with the idea of just having Bibarel and Squova as a fallback play in the Arceus-based build, so you can continue to just draw well throughout the entire game, which, you can't really say that that's not powerful, but it seems like other attacking partners may be the stronger choice for the World Championships. Although, it should be said that Arctina could have made top 8, however, there was a DQ for one of the actually UK players for sleeves. Just as a personal anecdote, I don't think it was intentional cheating or manipulation. Toby already had his Worlds invite and seems like a nice enough guy. I'd played him in Cups literally the week before. and seemed like a humble, nice person. But again, I wasn't there, so I have no other insight other than their character, I suppose. Going into the day 2 conversion, then, this is where we see which decks ended up with that 6-1 or better record. Like I said, God of War holding strong for such a popular deck. This is actually really amazing conversion, I think, which, again, is a nod to the power of God of War, how well it can draw, how well it can use Iono, how much damage potential it has as well. So God of War is still a very, very powerful, strong deck. Lost Box with a obviously very solid conversion, feasting on the 25% Guardian, no doubt. And you have to imagine that Lost Box is one of these archetypes where more adept players gravitate towards the Lost Zone engine, just because it's filled with micro and macro decisions from the get-go. So typically, if you're willing to bring a Lost Zone box, you're going to be at a competence level that has to be quite high, otherwise you're just going to do terribly with the archetypes. So that's something to bear in mind. There may be a number of players put off from Lost Zone box. So those who do choose to play it are typically of high caliber, or at least very experienced with the Lost Zone. Then we have Archeops Lugia still doing pretty well. And then we see the big story of the tournament, really. Arc Dura, definitely something that I'm having to sort of eat my words on. I thought this was losing ground, certainly after the EUIC, where it got this crazy win as this surprise archetype. It's essentially done it again, where it's made finals once more, and I thought that Arc Dura was going to be losing ground, as there was less percentage of Lugia I was expecting, and there was Iono in the format, and for an archetype that doesn't really have much of an onboard engine after using Starbirth, I expected this to really be falling off, but it seemed to have an insanely good day 1 and carried on into the top 8 and all the way to the finals as well. So Arc Dura with a number of different other attackers, but primarily Umbreon as that secondary, or I guess tertiary attacker, seems to be a really good combination, and I'll touch more on it when we look at the deck list in person. But yeah, Arc Dura is something I respected and is really doing well at the event. Then we have Mew, still doing pretty okay, and chien-pao still among that sort of top 6, as expected, losing a bit of percentage. It was really popular actually for day 1, but still has the ability to hang with the big decks. It's one of those things where I feel like it's less consistent than probably even all of the decks on this page, but if it has those decent starts, it can roll any of them at the same time. It has O-Hit-KO potential, it has spread potential on some of these lower hit point things. It makes other decks draw honestly and well as well, so that's something to bear in mind. So that is the day 1 and 2 conversion. Let's have a look, a little bit more detail now at the top 8. And in first place, it was Cyrus with Rapid Strike Inteleon Urshifu, which wasn't on either of those 2 graphics, and in fact is the only deck list within that top 32, I should go over here, where, yeah, only one Rapid Strike Toolbox made it into that top 32, but spiked the tournament in the hands of Cyrus, who is a very accomplished player already, and now has an international championships under their belts, a fantastic display with a really awesome and combo-heavy deck list. This is definitely one of those head-scratcher lists where you have a lot in your range with a number of double gunners, you have Painful Spoons available, you have Yoga Loop, so navigating those different options is really going to be the difference with an archetype like this. You have Yoga Loops available, you have Rapid Strike searching for a number of pieces in your deck, and you are combo reliant. And this was really a surprise at the tournament, and I think actually Cyrus made a very good call. She definitely identified that it can punish God of War players that naturally put themselves into really low hit points remaining just to reach on your VMAX Pokemon, so you can capitalize on that with Spoon mid-turn KOs or taking additional turns with Yoga Loop. Additionally, there's, as we know, very low hit point Pokemon scattering around the Lost Zone box engine, and they basically can't function without it, so being able to snipe those down with your double gunners and whatnot is exceptional, especially if you can Spoon or Yoga Loop onto Manaphy, then you enable the Gmax Rapid Flow. And actually, Arceus had such a good tournament, not just Arc Dura, but also Arc Tina, especially among the top 32. Really popular archetype, I think. Going back to the statistics, Arc and Guardi were both in a 9 count in that top 32, so all of them sort of going up towards the top end of the tournament. That allowed Cyrus to have some really good matchups. You punish Arc with weakness, as we saw in the finals. You punish Gardevoir and Lost Zone box with your ping potential, that you actually cover a large portion of the metagame. Now, I think this kind of has to dodge and weave Lugia and Mew, but they didn't necessarily have that strong of a tournament, so Cyrus was really in the clear, and a really gutsy and bold metagame call She said in her interview that she said, based on the archetypes she was expecting to see, this was really well placed and had the best percentages. And boy, was she right. That's a really fantastic call for the tournament. The list itself was a little bit greedy in that it said no and had no respect for Mew at all. I think just essentially taking that L, more or less, you have no Spiritomb, no Drapion, anything of the sort. You're really just in a bad way if you do face the Mew players. And you do have some plays against Lugia, but it's definitely not one that you're necessarily too favoured in. But it did open up the deck list to just have more consistency. We're seeing the triple Forest Seal Stone. We obviously get to see Iono come into the deck list, which is a big buff for an archetype like this that likes to sort of sit back and take multiple prizes over, well, sometimes a couple turns, but without the opponent responding, and you're able to Iono opponents back, and with really high VMAX hit point Pokemon that you can send into the active position, sometimes Iono and just dodge boss becomes a win condition for you and gains you a turn here and there. Speaking of gaining turns, we do have the greed supporters of Cheryl that can sometimes buy a turn back, and the Clara, which can get back some Pokemon that get picked off, as well as giving you instant access to your double gunners all over again. So yeah, just a streamlined, straightforward build, and ticks a lot of boxes, honestly. I think this is going to turn a few heads going into the World Championships because the logic is still very strong. I imagine there could be an uptick in Mew. Don't necessarily see a reason why there'd be an uptick in Lugia, because I still don't think it's great into Arcdura, but I think that would be the only hurdle really for Intel Urshi. And it's still difficult to go all the way through a tournament without hitting many Mews. I'm not sure how many Cyrus hit themselves, but if you make that gutsy call, it's really going to pay off, and it did in this instance. Then we have Ian's second place Arcdura Umbreon, and this just seems to have enough elements within this package of sort of three big bulky attackers to cause headaches for a number of decks in the format. We have that consistency element of the Arceus with that Starbirth, but also just thinning the deck of your energy cards means that if you are getting hit with Judges and Ryonos from opponents, you've naturally filtered a lot out, and you naturally have attackers lined up for the following turn that even if you end up with one of the weaker hands, you are still at least continuing to attack and put on some pressure, which is really nice. We have the Duraludon with that Skyscraper, very frustrating for Lugia players. It becomes a win condition in itself, where if you can deal with that Urshifu first, or if some Lugias have cut Urshifu, you immediately just win on the spots with the Duraludon, which is great. It's also annoying for other Arc players like Arctinas at times, so that's also exceptional. You have the wall breaking as well, so you're not concerned about any other Pokemon that would otherwise be a headache for you. You just get through it quite easily. And then you have the Umbreon V and VMAX package. The Mean Look can be a win condition in itself if you've seen your opponent either doesn't play or has already got rid of their Penny Pad combination. You can try and Mean Look plus Painful Spoon your way through the game to just instantly trap them for the remainder. You can deal 30 damage and spoon off a number of those counters, and then at some point attach double turbo energies and continue to spoon at that point when you're only doing 10 damage, so you keep the active Pokemon trapped. Additionally, because your Pokemon have such high hit points, if a Gardevoir player commits enough psychic energy to get a knockout cleanly with the likes of Zacian or something like that onto your Duraludon or your Umbreon, you can even at that point gust the Gardevoir EX up, and you even play around Penny that way because they've commit too many energies on their Zacian. The only thing you have to watch out for at that stage would be Collapse Stadium, because otherwise they can collapse away Zacian and hit you back with their Gardevoir EX. But yeah, you have a number of avenues that you can trap people with your Moonglow Spoon combination, which is immediately a win condition and makes Gardevoir players play differently against you throughout the entire game. But you also just have good old-fashioned, I have Dark Signal and Lost City at my disposal, so at any point I can Lost Zone a full Gardevoir EX line, or even if it's like turn 2, you can try and just Nova into Curliers and Rolts and remove these from play altogether. Lost City is really good at just denying the Gardevoir draw engine. As we've seen, its Arc decks and also fusion-based Mew builds are playing Lost City to just try and limit the number of Gardevoir and Curlier the opponent has access to throughout the entire game, because that's the lifeblood of the archetype. So removing those from play is kind of a big deal. It's also your type coverage against Mew, which is obviously going to be helpful. Ian's actually also playing Spiritomb to help out somewhat against the Lugias, to just slow them down, but mostly I think this is against Fusion Mew, giving some respect to that, saying that if Arc is knocked out too proactively by a Meloetta Sparkle combo, you lose on the spot, so giving yourself that Spiritomb, that bit of safety, is definitely nice. And the Radiant Alakazam can make for some crafty plays once again. Gardevoirs are damaging themselves so much, Zacians are damaging themselves so much just to reach these higher hit point thresholds that sometimes with your 2-hit KO Pokemon you can spoon things into mid-turn KOs, especially against Gardevoir, which is massive, or just put other things in range. We hit 220 with the Dura, we have Belt to 250, so sometimes just spooning over a number of turns from Trinity Novas and whatnot can put you in range as well, so actually a really important card for the deck list. Ian's really playing a straightforward 60, really. The supporter line is pretty creative. I don't think we've seen quad Iono in this build too often, but yeah, it's one of the best supporters in the game, so just lean into that. Heavy on the boss's orders, plus Adventurous Discovery and Umbreon and Lumineon gives you access to a ton of Gust throughout the entire game, even when you're getting hit to lower hand sizes. I think that's one of my biggest worries of playing Arctura myself, is that you don't have much of an engine, but giving yourself just so many outs with remaining Ultra Balls in deck, Luminion, Umbreons, Adventurers, and Boss, you have so many ways of just having that late game Gust to close out the game, even when you are hit with Hand Disruption. And even though this isn't a huge amount of raw outs, you have to remember that you've already thinned a majority of your Pokemon, a majority of your energy cards just from early Novas and Charges and turn attachments, so you actually still have decent odds, to be honest with you, because the deck just naturally thins itself after a couple of attacks. So yeah, it seems to have decent answers again to the field. It's hard targeting Gardevoir in some aspects as well, with this combination of Lost City, Umbreon, Judge Path in here as well, Iono Path as a late game panic play against Guardy. So you are, causing problems to all sorts, and clearly they've both beaten a few Guardies along the way. But Gardevoir, it's not all tears. It's going to continue to be probably the front runner going into the World Championships, because to still manage to make top 4, Cal Connor, very accomplished player at this stage, still impressing, and has a really solid deck list, I think. Penny is, like I mentioned, going to be respecting the mean looks or the more wiles out there, but also has upside of picking up Luminion or Zacian, so similar to the Tord EUIC 60, where sometimes you can play around Escape Rope from Lost Box players, promote these sorts of Pokemon, and then gain that turn back. Similar thing you can do with Collapse Stadium. And you have that Power Pad as well, so you're protecting yourself and just making sure you're not losing instantly to a Tech Inclusion, which is definitely a wise choice, because Gardevoir did have that target on its back going into this tournament. Outside of that, everything is pretty much streamlined and straightforward from what we've seen before. To squeeze in the space with a Penny, it's cut the Iono, but you're also playing the Luminion anyway, so you're pretty high overall on outs to find decent supporter, which is really nice. I guess the only real debate is the Temple of Sinnoh versus the Artisan Stadium, and I think Lugia had a weak enough performance that it's probably worth making that flip-flop going into Worlds, but other than that, seems very straightforward. The Psyshot Rolts I'm still not a big fan, because you already have literally Psyshot from Mew already, and I think Teleportation Burst is slightly better, but these are already niche attacks, so I don't think it's that big of a deal. But yeah, just a small thing to note there. It did end up doing well in both the top 4 lists, so maybe I'm just in the wrong here. But we also have Rowan 60, slightly different in that it's not playing the fish and it's just playing sort of high counts of the good supporters, and is foregoing the pad worker combo and is just playing 3 copies of Stadium. So they're sort of more immediate answers, which is always a nice thing to see, to have bounces to that path. This is playing the Artisan, and outside of that, it's more or less the same counts that we've seen before. Is choosing to play that Spiritomb to have some respect to the Mew matchup, which was fairly hyped going into this event. So again, yeah, seems pretty okay. I don't think I'd ever not play the Memory Skip Rolts. I think it's too important to cut, but hey-ho. Lost Box didn't exactly flop this tournament. It still had a decent number of showings, including this top 8 placement from Victor, and it was just a turbo build. A few interesting things here. We're seeing the Luminion Ultra Ball package coming in over. Sometimes you'd see things like Trekking Shoes in here, and these seem to just be more high impact cards to find in your opening turns, just to make sure you don't whiff Colress, which is really nice. Is playing that double Forest Seal Stone, still playing the Pokestops, and is squeezing in an Artisan. Still quite cheeky on those energy counts, but outside of that, it's a pretty standard list of Turbo, so it still seems to be getting the job done. We then have Katron, the always ingenious deck builder with another creative combination of cards here, where we still have that Arc Umbreon package, so all the things I said about Ian's list you can sort of insert here as well, but also instead of playing the Duraludon, has a few other tricks up their sleeve. Has the 1/1 counter Flying Pikachu, that Max Balloon, still going to be a headache, still giving you decent type coverage as well. Definitely good against chien-pao, definitely good against a number of Lugia players. Can, even with Iono, be a decent combination against Lost Zone Box at times, so something to bear in mind. But is then playing the Spicy Slacking V. Ironically, we had this in our set review when we were talking about Spiritomb as a bonus upside that you have, where you can turn off your kinda lazy ability with the help of Spiritomb and the Path, I suppose, in the deck list, so that you can hit that vanilla 260. 260 isn't the golden number, but there is double choice belt in the list, there is Radiant Alakazam, and there's even Yoga Loop, so there are ways you can manipulate this 260 to be very advantageous for you. To either knock out V-Star Pokemon with the help of Spoons or Belt, or to set up Pokemon for Yoga Loop plays as well, which I think is really cute and cool. The Spiritomb has upside into Mew, not just the Slacking, but it's a guaranteed card in this list for that reason. And the Yoga Loop isn't just for the Slacking, obviously. Just the fact that you have the Hawlucha and Zam, you can get some surprise Yoga Loops. And in general, again, your hit points are so high that Arcana Guardians put themselves down to 20 hit points all the time against you. So punishing them just by having double turbo Yoga Loop is definitely on the table. You have free retreat pivot plays from Flying Peak as well. So it's just something you can do, which I think is very cool. Still incorporating the Lost Cities, still incorporating a bit less of a scattergun approach than Ian's support line. Isn't playing that Raihan, which is a bit scary. Isn't playing the Adventurous Discovery, which I do think is a powerful option with the Umbreon, but just sticking with the sort of tried and true power supporters, which is always okay. And it's very, very high on the V-Guard energy. Even playing the one copy of Water with Luminion, which I think is super cute. Maybe that catches people out here and there. If your opponent is starting to ping down Luminion with Sableye or Greninja or something like that, you can sort of punish that play, which I think is, again, pretty cute, especially when you don't need that many basic Dark and certainly not many basic Lightning. You get to play the Water because a lot of the time this energy is going on Slacking anyway, but there's the upside of it sometimes coming in clutch against, alongside your Fish, which is really cool. So yeah, Katron, if you look at their Limitless page, you'll see all sorts of crazy deck building, but they always find a way to make it work, and they squeeze a lot out of 60 cards that seems to counter a huge sort of array of the metagame. Christian Labella was able to also make top 8 with the more straightforward approach, is incorporating the Volo, which we hadn't seen in Ian's list, and is also playing 2 copies of the Panic Mask. This is obviously a tech card for Gardevoir. Again, the self-damage on the Guardi means that they then cannot attack into your VMAXs, so you are forcing boss's orders or forcing other things into play. So a decent tech card. I think it was between Panic Mask and Box of Disaster going into this tournament as sort of tech cards for Gardevoir, which I'd seen around. I remember tweeting that in day one he faced a couple of Box of Disasters that caught him off guard. It could well be that going into the World Championships, Gardevoir ends up playing like 3 Stadium and 1 Vacuum. I think I've seen that, and it's even slightly has some upside because you can Celebrations Mew for that card anyway. So maybe that's something we need to monitor. I feel like these tech cards were sort of better for NAIC than they will be for Worlds, because Gully could be adapting, but again, it's one of those things. Also, Christian kind of only really made top 8 because the opponent did panic when they saw this or didn't quite notice it, so that was a funny stream game for sure. One final note is that they're playing the Luminous, which actually makes a ton of sense when you have your Dur and your Umbreon, which are always just loading up on basic energy, basically almost all the time. So the Luminous sort of slots in and gives you some prizing coverage, which I think is actually a pretty smart call. And also gives you that Fish coverage that we were talking about, so there's also that as a potential option. Unfortunately, we don't have Justin's Lugia list, but I'm sure it's going to be kind of straightforward Lugia. I would imagine just throwing in Iono and possibly Jet Energy and not much else. So again, going back to the statistics, great tournament for Arc, great tournament for Guardi, pretty okay for Lost Zone Box, decent conversion from day 1 to 2 as well for how unpopular it was, even though it was the second most popular. It's a weird thing to say. chien-pao actually did pretty okay, 3 showings. Quite bad, I would say, for Lugia and Mew for how popular they were. And Cyrus having a great meta game call. Let's have a couple more looks at some lists. Nate in top 16 was the highest placing Mew, and it was that sort of fusion-based build. A few interesting cards in here. Quad Forest is something you don't see every day. Just give yourself that opening hand goodness to get your combo rolling and don't worry about drawing blanks later on in the game, I suppose. I also find the feather nest flip-flop a little bit weird. I felt like whenever I've played Fusion, I've wanted more and more nest balls, whereas the feathers are obviously insta-playables, but can't get Genesects in the opening stages. Just a small thing there. And then we also have Owen's chien-pao Baxcalibur, which was the highest placing list in top 16. And it's playing the Arceus combo. We had seen this before in the online tournaments, but obviously having that star buff is, compared to Palkia, you know, less explosive as an attacking threat, but allows you to cherry pick some combinations, be it Candy Backs, be it some cross-switcher plays, be it key supporter cards like Boss or Avery, to help you get into the game and get established. Even plays that Celebrations Mew, which is again really nice. Superior is a massive card for the archetype, but also the heavy leaning into of Cologne and cross-switcher, again, is a nod to the Celebrations Mew and how powerful it is. A little bit counterintuitive, because typically you're Shivery chilling out a ton of the energy, but I suppose you could chill first, cross-switcher, and like retreat or something off the Mew, or you could Mew first, even with lower odds with the water energy in deck, and just Shivery chill afterwards, because you will have already thinned the deck of a few of these from opening chien-paos, so even just as a mid-game play, the Mew is pretty reasonable. So yeah, pretty solid list overall. The Avery definitely helps highlight the power of Greninja. If you see an Avery, then get Cologne cross-switchered, my goodness, that would be terrifying. The power spike is certainly there. A few other highlights, unfortunately, we don't have the list for Chris's Arc Aerodactyl, but that's certainly a spicy one. We do have Jared, who was also seen on stream playing the Arc, but also played with Barrel in their Baxcalibur. But more of the same, really. A few Arctinas. As I already mentioned, there could have been an Arctina in top 8, were it not for a DQ for sleeves being marked. So not necessarily a bad tournament for Arctina either, I suppose. But it's definitely stolen the show by the Arctura Umbreon, which seems to be a big threat going into the World Championships. I'm certainly going to be doing a lot of content on how we're going to have to adapt to the top archetypes, you know, how Lost Box can come back when there's so much Arctura Umbreon around, how we can try and adapt to that, how Gardevoir can adapt to the sort of ping damage of Radiant Alakazam and from Double Gunner in these sorts of archetypes. Definitely going to be something that you have to monitor as Gardevoir and be a little bit more careful with what you're attacking with throughout the entire tournament. So yeah, definitely a lot to think about going into Worlds. A real head scratcher. Really surprised to see, certainly the finals, which archetypes came out on top, but also the adaptations that many players have made to the format already. So yeah, let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.